Okay, we have gone through most of our processing options, or at least for the basic tools in Lightroom. We've got three more to cover, and we're just going to throw them all in the same video just because they're so quick. So we went through color corrections, isolative color corrections, and split toning. Now, I'm going to talk quickly about detail. Basically, this is sharpening and noise reduction. It's a sharpening tool, but you'll use noise reduction within it to make the most out of your sharpening. You'll see these tools affect areas with a lot of the same color. So you're not going to see sharpening super or the detail tool. You won't really see that effect in something that has a lot of texture. If you look at an area where it's just an area of color and not so much a textured part of the image, that's where you'll really see this come into play. You can see a lot of noise here in the mountains, whereas you won't see near as much in the clouds. But any of these darker areas, specifically the dark areas that we've pushed light into that were originally underexposed in black, you're going to see a lot of the noise show up there versus in the brighter, even exposed and textured areas. Basically, in a nutshell, the amount of sharpening does, you can see that affect the image, and it sharpens it up. It's tack sharp now, but you can also see it gets really jittery, especially along your lines. It's not as harsh in areas, but specifically in contrast lines, you'll see it start to do some really weird jittery stuff with the image. The radius is how broad of an area does the sharpening affect. So are we keeping it limited to fine pixels, or is it expanding to affect a broader pixel area? Okay, so we'll take a look at the image with detail off. You can see this is the negative, as it is unprocessed, or I guess fairly processed. Detail tool will help us clean up this noise, and it will crisp up some of these lines along the edges. Because the shot was underexposed to begin with, and we brightened it up, we are seeing a lot more noise. I'm just going to give you my basic formula. I've found that this set of numbers works particularly well for me. If you're shooting a lot of low ISO, you could probably boost these numbers and get some more sharpening out of it. If you're shooting a really high ISO, then you probably want to tone this down a little bit. But I found an amount of 70, radius of 80, detail of 40, masking of 10 works best for sharpening it just enough without going too much. And then I do 30-50-50, 30-50-50 for my noise reduction and smoothing. Any more beyond that, and it starts to look smudged and blurry. Anything less, and there's still going to be a decent amount of noise. I found that this just works for me. Lens corrections. Every camera creates its own metadata for every picture it takes. So when you pull the image into specifically an Adobe product, but Lightroom for this instance, it knows which camera you've used, it knows which lens you've used, and it applies the correct profile to even out the distortion and fix the lighting and basically just fine-tune how your image is interpreted by Lightroom. So I enable the profile corrections, I remove chromatic aberration, I let it do all that on its own. I set my chromatic aberration reduction to 2 and 2. Anything beyond that, specifically with portraits, and especially if your subject has purple or greenish hues, this will start to damage the image more than it helps. So I started at 2, and I increase it as needed. For the manual lens corrections, this lets you, it's kind of like a pre-crop tool. You can see that it pulls up this grid whenever you hover over it, and it lets you, the grid is helpful for aligning and correcting distortion and rotation. At this point, if I wanted to take the image back to where it was basically when the camera brought it in, the camera has a slight bulge distortion to it. We can push that even further. We can make it look like it was taken on a super wide angle lens. Basically, it's pulling these corners out almost as if it was a sheet of stretchy material, and it's pulling each of the corners out and really stretching that warp in the corners, which you can scale up and crop that excess out. And lastly, this effects panel is basically vignetting. That's really what it is. Your amount is how dark of a vignette do you go. Midpoint is how close to the center will you take the vignette. Roundness is more or less the shape of the vignette and go more to a square look and more to a full-on circle look. Feather is how feathered the vignette is, how soft are the edges and how versus how hard. And highlights, let's say you want this super intense vignette. Highlights lets you vignette the image as a whole and maintain the bright sections of the image. So very useful when doing some heavy vignetting. Your grain, again, it's a stylization that lets you add grain to the shot or reduce it, size of the grain, and how rough it looks. Again, it's all stylization. I usually don't do that in Lightroom. If I'm going to add grain, I'm going to do it in Photoshop. Dehaze isn't going to be very useful for this image because we don't have much fog, but we can check out this hazy part of the image and watch it work. It does exactly what you think it would. It basically provides elemental contrast for the hazy sections of the image, but you do have to be careful because it will act kind of like a polarizer and it will intensify the image. And watch the sky area and see what happens. It basically acts like a custom contraster for hazy parts of the image, so it's really easy to overdo it with the hazing and the dehazing. You can also use it in the inverse and add haze and make it look super foggy. Stylization, customization, it's a tool that's there. I don't use it very often, but sometimes it comes in really handy. Okay, well that is it. If you've watched all the videos up through this point for Lightroom, then we've gone through all of basic processing in Lightroom and each of the tools and how they're used. The next video, we're going to be talking about these up here. These are local adjustment tools, and we're going to talk about how to use those. So that'll be in the next video. Go check it out.